Thank you. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, with that set of questions, I think we've arrived at an interesting place in the conversation. Everybody seems to agree that if a man and a woman are both doing the exact same job and the woman is paid 20% less, it's against the law under the Equal Pay Act. And there are cases like that all the time. But as one of our colleagues pointed out earlier, that may account for a small percentage. I think she said 2 to 5%. I think Ms. May said 2 to 5% of the wage gap. So really, when we talk about these dramatic differences in what women and men make, it has to do with structural inequality within the workforce. And Mr. Grothman has just offered the theory in that last colloquy that this is all about the choices that women make, the flexibility that women want to have, the fulfillment choices they're making. It is interesting that with millions and millions of people in the workforce, the flexibility and fulfillment choices made by women always seem to end up with women making a lot less than men. It never randomly seems to work out the other way, that the fulfillment and flexibility choices men seek end up in men making less money. But I want to go to some of the people who actually studied this. And I'd like to ask Dr. Mason this question. If we've got structural discrimination, that there are certain sectors of the workforce like childcare, elder care, other caring professions that are systematically underpaid, and this is associated overwhelmingly with women being in those positions, would we say that that's just the market operating, or is there something that we can do about that if we're interested in actually rewarding women equally and empowering them?
So one of the things I want to say is that if we were really truly talking about a market operating the way that it should, then care workers, elder care workers would be making much, much more. But because the sector is dominated by women, wages are depressed. And so this is not simply about the market doing its thing, because we know that in a market economy, women are disadvantaged because of historic racial and gender discrimination. And when we talk about choices, it's also important to remember that for many women, these are constrained choices. These are not choices with the full range of options. Women perform 30% more care work compared to their male counterparts. So when you talk about overtime and you talk about women making choice to have more flexibility, what we have to understand, for many women, it's really not a choice. And when we factor in women's unpaid labor, we're talking about billions of dollars each year that disappears, into the economy because women are not being compensated or losing out.
I wanted to follow up by going to Agent Pooh on the same question. You pointed out that when the National Labor Relations Act was passed back in the 1930s, that domestic workers were specifically excluded from the ability to organize under the Wagner Act, just as farm workers were also roped off. And there were clearly both racial and gender dimensions to those decisions by Congress. To what extent did those legislative decisions end up affecting or depressing the wages and benefits that were earned by, in this case, domestic workers over the succeeding 8 or 9 decades? Does that explain is that one of the reasons why domestic work is so poorly compensated today?
It absolutely is. In fact, the Fair Labor Standards Act that established the minimum wage also explicitly excluded both farm workers and domestic workers. And those exclusions set the tone for the treatment of domestic work and care work in our law and policy for generations since.
So what legislative changes are you fighting for now?
We are currently fighting for a domestic worker bill of rights at the federal level, legislation that is sponsored by Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal and will be reintroduced in May. We are also fighting for a big investment in our care economy overall as part of our jobs and recovery plan. And this is really important because we have been talking a lot about infrastructure investments and how important it is. Bridges, tunnels, broadband, absolutely. And I would argue that caregiving, childcare, paid leave, home and community-based services for the elderly and people with disabilities, and the workforce that supports those essential needs on the part of working families are essential infrastructure in order to enable our economic recovery and our ability to get back to work. Care jobs are job-enabling jobs. They are
Well, it sounds to
job-ready
me
jobs.
like the equal pay agenda you're describing is also a family values agenda because it's an investment in the workforce that cares for our families. My time is up, and thank you for your indulgence, Madam Chair. I yield back to you.
Gentleman yields.